Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Anton here. So we're back with a brand new video, and we're going to go ahead and get started with CSS. The CSS is a style sheet language which is primarily used for modifying how content on an HTML document should be described as. For example, CSS takes care of which color your text will be, but will also take care of what font size your title should appear as. One thing to note is that CSS is the presentation and HTML is the content. Both of these do not depend on each other, and they would work just fine independently. However, there's really no point to not join these two together, because how would you present something if you have no content? Likewise, if you had CSS with no HTML, there would be absolutely no point. And also, if you have content, but you have nothing that can be presentable, you probably would not want to market that in the first place. So in comparison, if you have HTML without any styling, you probably would not want to show that to your customers. Now, there are many ways that you can actually style your HTML elements. The common way that you can do this is by adding a style tag inside the head tag. So we're going to go inside our HTML file that we created, and let me just close this out. Let me actually open up live server. Alright, so we have our live server opened up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a style tag inside the head tag over here. And I can start by selecting certain elements that I want to style. So let's say, for example, I don't really like how this h1 tag is being presented in our HTML document. So I'm going to select it by specifying the type of tag, so h1, and then what we have to do, we have to follow the syntax where we specify a pair of curly braces right after, and everything inside this curly brace, this is where we're going to describe the style of our h1 tag or our h1 element. So if I wanted the color of this title of this h1 heading to be, let's just say, for example, red, I can just simply type red. Now, there are other ways that you can specify colors too. You can use hexadecimal values, so a pound symbol, and you could do something like FF0000. There you go. You can also just look up a bunch of hex color values. So you can see right over here, I have a bunch of different colors that I can just pick from. If you just Google hex color picker, something will pop up. So let's just pick this hexadecimal value, let's save that. And there we go, we have this bluish color. You can also use RGB. So RGB stands for red, green, and blue. So we can just type RGB, or color, sorry, RGB. And let me go ahead and just copy a different color now. So let's try a bit of a purple color. And we'll pass this in over here. Now notice how, one thing that I completely just missed is color over here is the property name, and we have a colon right after the property. So it's kind of like JSON. If you've ever used JSON before, you have a property or a key that maps to a value over here. So you can see that we have the property color, and then this property maps to this value over here. Likewise, if I were to just override that, it would override the previous value, kind of like JSON. So those are three different ways that you can actually specify colors. In HTML, we have something called attributes, and you may have seen them in the last video where we attached the source attribute to the image tag, and then we attached an href attribute to the a tag. So attributes pretty much describe an HTML element, and we can attach attributes to any element that we want. Now, with the class attribute, this class attribute allows us to identify a specific HTML element. And the nice thing about classes is that, let's say, for example, if we want to attach a class to multiple different elements and give them certain styling, we can easily do that. So let's just go right over to this paragraph tag, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a class attribute by simply typing class equals, and now we have to give this a class name. So I can name it something like top text, or we can name it whatever you want. We just have to follow certain rules. So it has to start with a letter. It can be alphanumeric, and it can also have a hyphen or underscore, and they are also case sensitive too. So important hyphen text lowercase will not be the same as uppercase important hyphen text, just to let you guys know. I can go ahead and select this P tag, this P element, rather than just typing P, because remember, this is going to select every single P element in the document. So if I were to change the color, so let's say blue, notice how this paragraph would alter and this paragraph would be altered. Maybe I only want this paragraph up here to be altered. So instead of selecting P, we're going to select by the class name, so important text. And you'll notice that only this paragraph right over here is being selected, because we had given it a class and we're selecting by the class instead of the actual HTML element itself. So another thing to mention are IDs in HTML. So IDs are very similar in terms of naming convention. So for example, if I wanted to give an ID to this P tag, I would simply type ID, and I can go ahead and say top text, for example. You can name it whatever you want as long as it follows the basic rules. Now, the thing with IDs is IDs can only be applied to one HTML element. They're a unique identifier that identifies an HTML element. If you were to apply the ID to multiple elements in the document, there may be some conflictions. So make sure you only ever give an ID to one HTML element. Now, if you want to know when to use ID and when to use class, a good example would be, let's just say for this paragraph over here that I gave the ID to, I only want the styles applied with this P tag over here to be applied to this element only. I don't want all the styling that's going to be grouped with this ID to be applied to any other element. That would be a good case to use an ID, so that way it's unique to the document and no other element is going to have. If you need to group styles and apply it to multiple different elements in your document, then it would be best to use a class. So now let's select by ID. So to select by ID, we're going to go ahead and use the pound symbol and then the name of the ID, just like that. And now let's go ahead and change the font, so we can use font or font family, and we can change it to maybe sans serif. And notice how the font is going to be altered over here. I can also change the font size by simply doing font size 22 pixels, and likewise we can change the color. Let's give it purple. I can also make the font a little bit more bold, so let's do maybe something like bold, or there are different numbers that you can pass in, so 200, 300. There you go, that's a little bit bolder, but we'll leave it as bold for now. So just to recap, use classes when you need to apply that class to multiple elements, and use IDs whenever you need to apply it to only one HTML element. Alright, so in HTML you can also provide a background color. So let's just say, for example, if I want to give this whole document a background color of, let's say, gray, so we can go ahead and select the body as well. So right over here, we're going to type body, okay? And notice how I don't have a dot or a pound symbol, because like I said, we are selecting the HTML element itself, and there's only going to ever be one body, so it's okay to select it like this. Of course, you can give the body a class, but it's really up to you. So for example, if I want to give a background color to body, I would type background color, the property, and I can type in whatever value I want that represents a color. So I can give it a nice background color of maybe an RGB. This would be a dark gray. Okay, that's how you can do background colors, and you can also do hexadecimal values as well. All right, and that's pretty straightforward when it comes to background colors. You can give background colors to anything that you want. So for example, I can go down over to this div, and let me actually get rid of this attribute, this style attribute over here. This is actually inline CSS, and inline CSS is actually going to override the CSS that you have up here. So we can actually just get rid of that, and notice how that gets removed. So let me go over and give this div a class. Hello div. Not really the best name, but you want to usually, what you want to do is you want to name your divs something that will help you remember what it is. So for example, let's just say if this div is responsible for programming languages, I can simply say, hey look, let's give this a class of programming languages, and that'll help me remember that, hey look, this is a div that holds all of the information about programming languages. And now I can select it, programming languages, and let's go ahead and give it a background color of, let's do maybe a bluish color. And there you go, we have a background color for this specific div. And we can also change the height and the width of this div as well. So let's say, for example, if I wanted to give this div a larger height of maybe 800 pixels, well, you would type the numeric value, and then you have to type the unit. So in this case, this is pixels. You can also do 800 view height, which is going to be a lot longer. Do also maybe percentage, so we can do 60%, for example. And then we can also specify width, likewise. Change that to 300 pixels. And notice how all the content will try to wrap inside this div. And we can also provide spacing. So let's just say, for example, if I don't like how this text is just so close to the border of this div, I can provide some padding with the padding property. And you can give it a certain amount of padding. So 25 pixels, for example. So that's pretty straightforward when it comes to padding. Let's just give it a nice 10 pixels. And you can also specify which direction you want the padding to start from. So for example, if I wanted padding top, I can only just do padding hyphen top, and that would only give us padding from the top. You can also do padding left, and that would only give padding from the left. You can also do it from the right or the bottom as well. But let's just say if you want to do it all with just one property, well, you can specify the values top, right, bottom, left. So you can think of it as if it was going in a clockwise direction. So for example, if I wanted 25 pixels spacing or padding from the top, I'll do 25px. And let's just say from the right side, I wanted 50 pixels, that would be 50px. And from the bottom, maybe we want only 80 pixels. And from the left, we'll do 150 pixels. So you see that on the left side, the spacing is a lot larger. On the top, you have 25 pixels over here. So it's top right. Can't really notice on the right too much. Let me actually just make this larger. There you go. Now you can see that it's a little bit more wider on the right side. On the bottom, we have 80 pixels. And then on the left side, we have 150 pixels. So remember, it's 25 pixels from the top, 150 from the right, 80 from the bottom, and 150 pixels from the left. So top, right, bottom, left. Now we can also provide margins for our elements as well. And I'll explain the difference between margin and padding once I show you what margins actually are. So let's say if I wanted this div to be a little bit spaced out, like, because right now we have spacing only inside of this div. Let's say I want spacing outside of this div over here. So let's say from the top, maybe I might only want 25 pixels. So let's do margin hyphen top, 25 pixels. You notice how it kind of shifts down a little bit. Let's change it to 125 and you'll see that there's more spacing over here. Okay, and that's basically the margin. It's spacing that's outside of the HTML element. I can do the same thing. I can say, hey, look, let's do 80 pixels from the top. Let's do maybe 25 pixels from the right, and let's do 40 pixels from the bottom, and then let's do 20 pixels from the left. So you'll see that there's margin right over here, and you can't really tell from the right side because this div itself is going to take up the whole width of the document. But you can see on the left side that there is some margin over here. So top, right, bottom, left. So let's give it like maybe 120. There you go. And you can also actually just specify two values. So 80 pixels over here, this first value would be top and bottom, and then this 25 pixels would be left and right. So for example, if I change this to, let's say 5, that would only be left and right. And if I change this value to 40 or 30, that would be top and bottom. So those are different ways that you can set margin and padding in different formats. All right, now we can also give borders to our elements as well. So let's say I might want a border for this div. I can simply just type border, and then the size of this border could be something like maybe 5 pixels. The style of it would be maybe like a solid border, and then for the color we could do something like gold, and you'll see now we have this gold border around this div. And we can also give it a different style. Maybe we want it to be dashed, and now you can see that we have this dashed border. We might also want it to be dotted, so we have this dotted border. There's a whole bunch of different styles, but we can stick with the solid for now. And of course I can always just change up the border color whatever I want. You can also specify borders on, let's say, the top side, for example. So if I wanted border top, I can do something like 2px solid pink, for example, and that would only give a border on the top. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about is alignment. So let's just say if I wanted to style this text up here and I wanted it to be in the center, because right now you can see that it's aligned to the left side. So let's go up top over here, and we had given this text an ID of top hyphen text. So if I wanted this to be aligned in the center, I would use the text align property, and I would set the value to center. And notice how now text is aligned in the center. If I want it to be aligned to the right, we could do that as well. By default, it's aligned to the left. And I can also do the same thing for this H1 up top over here. So let's go over here and let's do text align center, and that should be pretty straightforward. And notice how I think it was also aligned down here. Yep. All right, so another thing that I also want to show is, let's say for example, if you want to get rid of the bulletin points from a list, you can also do that as well. So let's go up top over here, and we're going to go ahead and select this unordered list. So we're going to type UL, and we're going to use the list style type property and set it to none. And you're going to see that the bulletin points are removed. And you might want to do this because quite often you'll probably create some kind of navigation bar, and you probably want to use an unordered list because that just makes things a lot easier, but you don't want the bulletin points to be there. So you can also remove padding right over here, so that way you can get rid of that spacing that's from the left side that's there by default. And let's say if you wanted all of these elements to be aligned right next to each other, well, by default each one of these list item elements have a display of block. So that's the reason why every single one of these list item elements are on the next line. So for example, if I wanted to have all of these elements to be displayed right next to each other, we're going to select the list item just like that. So we're doing UL, and I can select a nested item or nested element that's inside of the UL. So notice how over here, this unordered list, all of these list item elements are all children of the UL element. You can think of the UL as the parent that wraps all of these list items together. And we can also do the same thing too with other elements as well. So if I want to select the H1 that's inside of this div, I can just do div H1 or dot programming hyphen languages H1. And I'll show you that in just a sec. But first, let's go ahead and set display to inline. And notice how all of these list items are all being displayed right next to each other. And of course, I can give it padding to make it look a little bit nicer, make it look like an actual navigation bar. So let's give it 18 pixels, font family of, let's just say Calibri. There we go. Now, again, like I was saying earlier, we can select certain elements that are part of a parent container. So if I wanted to select maybe the H1 that's inside programming languages, well, I can, right after programming languages, I can type H1 that will target the H1. And that's going to be, I think, this one down over here. So let's give it a font size of 80 pixels. And you can see that the font has changed a lot. Let's bring it back to 40 pixels, 20 pixels. There you go. And then font color or just color. And we can change that to, let's just say gray. Okay, and that's going to override the previous styling that's up over here. Let's say if I wanted to remove this whole div. So instead of actually removing it from the index.html, the actual document, we can use CSS to hide it. So we can set the display of that to none, and that's going to just completely not display it. I can also do that with visibility property. So we can set the visibility to hidden, and you can see that it's hidden, but you can see that if you scroll down, you can see that there's this large gap, which shows that it's actually still there, but it's just hidden. You can also set the opacity as well. Let's just set it to maybe 50 or 50%. We want to do 10%. You can still see it right over here a little bit, but let's just set it to 0. And there you go, it's completely gone. Maybe it'd be better to display as none, so we don't have that large gap down there. Now, CSS has something called pseudo class, and pseudo class define a special state of an element. So let's say, for example, if we were to hover over a certain list item, we might want to style it so that when we hover over it, it's going to display in a different color. So if I wanted to make it so that every single list item inside this unordered list, when we hover over it, it's going to turn blue, we can simply do ULLI, and then we use a colon, and then the name of the pseudo class. So we can simply just type hover. And now, so when we hover over it, maybe I might want the color to, let's just say, be white, for example. So notice how when I hover over it, these elements, the color changes. I can also set the cursor to be a pointer. So it looks like we can actually click on it. And there are a whole bunch of other pseudo classes that you can play around with. All right, now before I end this video, there's one more thing that I want to show. So right now we've been using the style tag, and although it works, you don't want to put all of your CSS in the same file as your HTML file. In the real world, you're never going to do this, so make sure what you want to do is you want to create a new file called index.css, and you're going to copy literally all of your CSS that you wrote over here, and you're going to paste that over here. And now the next question is, well, how do I bring this CSS into this file now? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. So you're going to type link rel style sheet and then href, so we're going to reference index. And watch what happens. We have all of our CSS, so now I don't need to have the style tag up all the way on the top inside the head tag. I can actually just put all of my CSS inside over here. And the couple things that this does, one, it makes our HTML file a lot more cleaner because we don't have to jumble our HTML with our CSS. And two, you actually have modular CSS, so someone else can take the style sheet and apply these styles to their HTML elements. So if you wanted to write some kind of cool CSS library or framework that other people can use, you could do that. But yeah, so just make sure that you always keep your CSS inside another file. I only put it inside the style tags just for demonstration purposes, but like I said, to practice this, you want to always make sure that you put CSS inside a separate file. So I guess we're going to end the video over here. There are a couple things that we did not go over, such as positioning, but I want to save that for another video because I feel like that topic itself deserves its own video, so we can actually show several examples rather than having everything just jumbled inside like this one file. So hopefully this video and the HTML video help you guys out a lot. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to take what we've learned and put it into an actual application. So we're actually going to build out a sample web template just to get started with how we can actually apply our knowledge into real world practice. So I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.